Hello and welcome to the Bubb Report. Last week, economists and speculators started raising alarm bells about runaway inflation and further economic cataclysm spurred by the global shipping and supply chain crisis that is affecting almost every aspect of socioeconomic life globally. Richard Howells, a supply chain management consultant, attributes this current global supply chain crisis to a phenomena called the revenge economy that is the result of international economies reopening after prolonged lockdown periods in 2020. This reopening has engendered pent-up consumer demand, which has put significant strain on the global supply chain. Howell states further that there have been significant port closures in Asian countries such as China and Vietnam that export vital consumer goods and other supplies to the Western Hemisphere. These port closures in Asia have also contributed to the bottleneck of supplies sitting awaiting containers to carry them. Earlier this year, there was also a major shipping blockade in the Suez Canal, where the Ever Given container ship was wedged in that vital shipping lane for 6 days. The canal facilitates 12% of global trade, and the blockade continues to cause ripple effects. This week on the report, we discuss ways in which this shipping crisis is affecting Grenada and other small island economies, and what measures can be taken to mitigate against its deleterious impacts. Also last week, Grenada lost one of its preeminent cultural icons, Peter Bain. Bain, the son of the late Norris Bain, followed in his father's footsteps into the world of business ownership and management in his beloved Grenville, where he operated the Bain's upper-level nightclub, restaurant, bar, and conference center. In 1993, Peter Bain took his love for culture to another level after he founded the Rainbow City Mass Band Promoters, which also became a mainstay for traditional and folkloric carnival representations in Grenada. Bain also served as president of the St. Andrews Development Committee, and under his tenure was able to enhance the carnival experience for carnival revelers in the East Coast parish of St. Andrew. He also served as a member of the St. Andrews Development Organization. We here at the Bubb Report extend our deepest condolences to the Bain family on his passing. May his memory be a blessing. We welcome our guests, lecturer and commentator Claude Douglas, economist Don Charles, Kelvin Jacob, CEO of the Spice Mass Corporation, Emmanuel Duncan, Executive Director of the Grenada Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Shipping Cargo Executive Lloydon Brian Aline, and Senior Pilot at the Grenada Ports Authority, Lazarus Joseph. It's the week of October 10th, 2021. We thank you for joining us. Hello, viewers and listeners, and welcome to another edition of the Bubb Report. We're certainly happy that you can join us for this Sunday edition. And of course, for the first time since the end of August, Grenada is slowly getting to the place where the curve is being flattened with respect to its first COVID-19 pandemic wave. While the numbers of deaths, hospitalizations, and recoveries are favorable, the death toll continues to impact families across Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. One such family is the Sandyford family of Grenville Street in the town of St. George, who lost their matriarch Louis Ladybird Sandiford last week. She died at the hospital on Tuesday morning. 95-year-old Louis Sandiford was the last of a generation of Grenville Street residents cut from the cloth of resilience and hard work to have died in the last decade. She was one of the many Grenville Street entrepreneurs to own a small business in the area. Sandiford's shop was a mainstay of Grenville Street and a communal public sphere for town people who resided in the area. She was also a dedicated wife, mother, grandmother, and extended family member for the community. I therefore take this time to extend my deepest condolences to her family and to the community of Grenville Street and Four Roads on the passing of such a great icon. And I now welcome my first two guests in the spirit of memorializing and paying tribute to icons. Last week, we also lost another cultural icon in the person of the late Peter Bain, whose death, I would say, has been extremely untimely. And so I want to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Claude Douglas. He's a lecturer of sociology, but he's also a Grenville man, if you will, as well as Mr. Kelvin Jacob, who is the CEO of the Spice Mass Corporation. Gentlemen, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Good morning, and also thanks for the invitation to be here.
Absolutely. I sent the invitation on short notice, so I certainly thank you. These things happen like this, so I'm really grateful for the time that you're taking to be with us here today. But Mr. Douglas, I want to begin with you. I can't even begin to imagine the gaping void that Brother Bain's death would cause on the business community in the Grenville, but also on the general community as well as on the cultural community. Can you put into context that loss for the community of Grenville?
It's a very huge loss. And that vacancy that he has left, I don't think it can be filled that easily, because we talk about Peter Bain, we are talking about a multiplicity of things. We're talking about business, we're talking about culture, we're talking about sports. And hence the reason why, you had such, a wide reaction of griefs and condolences and tributes and all of those things because of the legacy that he has left. So Grenville, the town of Grenville, St. Andrew, and by extension, Grenada, have lost, and I want to go beyond the word icon and enthusiast and so forth, because if you ask me to describe Peter Bain in one word, the word that I will choose would be servant. All the other iconic statuses and so forth can be subsumed under this one word. Indeed, he was a true and humble servant, not only to St. Andrew, but the entire Trinidad state of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique.
Mr. Douglas, in reflecting on Peter's legacy, one of the things that he did in the 90s was to segue from just being an entrepreneur to getting in the cultural space when he formed the mass band, and when he I believe he also started a Queen show in Grenville. He supported a number of the Carnival Queen contestants that came from the parish of St. Andrew. So what would you say caused him to get into that space?
I love this question. I really love this question because this morning, reflecting on the program today, I said, I really do not want to start, looking at Peter as just the cultural icon or sporting enthusiast, but I want to go before. I want to go beyond that. Looking at Peter growing up in the town of Grenville, he was my senior at the St. Andrews Secondary School, and coming from a more advantageous socioeconomic background, that did not prevent Peter from mingling and associating with all walks of life, people from all walks of life, sorry. He was very humble, very, very humble. He grounded with every individual, and I want to just highlight that aspect of him, even before we go into his contributions to sports and culture and what have you. Who really was Peter Bain? that humble, easygoing, very approachable individual. And any person, sometimes you have people who come from similar socioeconomic background and they compartmentalize themselves and they're not very approachable, and Peter was, beyond that, so I just wanted to highlight that aspect of his life. And I'm listening to his son sometime last week. He also emphasized the fact that his father inculcated in them that spirit of humility, So from this background, I want to start there, what really caused him to get involved in these things, because you have sports people who had gone past, cultural people who would have participated. And after participation, that's it. Peter didn't stop there. So even after he stopped engaging in competitive sports, he still continued, contributing to the organization of sports and what have you. And hence the reason why you had, for example, the five-a-side 2020 football. You had the Mother's Day concert. Don't forget that Peter was also a DJ man called DJ Hawk. So that's why I said a multiplicity of things that he was involved in, and plus his own business. He had to run his own restaurant and assisted a number of organizations. The Paradise Football Club is a beneficiary, of his philanthropic, service to the community, because Peter would enter a deal with you. You say, okay, we're trying to raise some funds. He will say, okay, I wouldn't charge you for the hall, or just take the bar, or something of the sort. He always willing, to give whatever little, he can afford to in assisting those who came, who were in dire need, and these have to be underscored. So looking at the personality of the individual, one would have a more profound understanding of his role and his contribution in the field of sports and culture.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Douglas, and then we would segue now into the discussion on Carnival, because that is where I came to know Peter.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to bring in Mr. Jacob for this conversation. But when I think of Brother Bain and what he was able to do for Carnival in Grenville, right? I think one of the things that he was able to do was to really decentralize the Carnival, one. And I believe he also made mass band participation affordable for the masses. The pricing of the costumes and so on, I thought that was really good. But the third thing for me in reflecting on his role in contribution to Carnival is his passion and enthusiasm for traditional mass, because a lot of his mass band portrayals really reflected that culture and heritage and tradition of the Grenadian experience. So I'm going to bring in Mr. Jacob as well, but I want to get you to comment first, Mr. Douglas, on those three things.
Well, of course, affordability has always been an issue. And I think that, as you rightly said, that he made participation in mass in Grenville very affordable, all right? So that no one felt outpriced, by his costumes and so forth. So there was mass participation, and so much so that even though his band, for example, I still don't know the name of Peter's band. All that I heard people talked about, is that they are playing mass with Peter Bain.
Yes.
They're playing, who are you playing mass with? I say Peter Bain. I'm playing with Peter Bain this year, So he was so large in terms of what he actually was contributing and making affordable to people, for example, who we will consider to be the marginalized in society. He made it very affordable to them so that there can be mass participation. And also, I'm glad you touched on the traditional mass, because this is something that is really dying in Grenada. And there needs to be, and I know Mr. Jacob basically will shed some light on that. I'm not preempted, but I know he will shed some light on that. But he has made sterling contributions in terms of the cultural retention, because we need a lot of that in Grenada today. How can we retain? Because it's an erosion. There is a cultural evasion that is taking place, and also an erosion of our traditional mass and so forth. how can we retain? And I think Peter would have been contributing significantly to that. So I will leave the rest of Mr.
Yes,
Jacob.
Mr. Jacob, in picking up and teeing off on what Mr. Douglas said here about Peter's contribution to not only mass, but to traditional mass. You worked with him and you got to know him through the Spice Mass Corporation. So can you reflect on that legacy piece, please?
Yes, good morning, Kellen, good Mr. Bob, and good morning to all your
It's Dr.
listeners.
Bob, but that's all right.
Dr. Bob, yes. Yeah, at Spice Mass Corporation, we remember Mr. Bain as a master mass maker, a master mass man. That's how we refer to him. He was very dedicated. He's very humble. He's cooperative. He's a very honest man, and he was always willing to help. And the contributions he made to mass, both traditional and fancy mass in Grenada, will be lost right now. The contributions he actually made, we would not see it going forward. Well, we hope we would see it going forward through his through the legacy of his band, and the members of his band would bring that out. But we know that he being there, the role that he actually played, we would miss that role that he actually played with Spice Mass. Now, Mr. Bain has been producing mass for over 30 years, and he expanded his production to St. George in the latter years. I think it was 2015, 2016. He came to St. George and he began participating. And he actually brought a breath of fresh air to the parade on the streets and also to the pageant at the National Stadium. And this is something that we will significantly miss going forward if he is not there to actually front that part of the presentation. Now, his presentations, they were very creative presentations. And what I actually liked about his presentation, they told a story. It was like street theater, which is what mass actually supposed to be. So when he gives a band a name, you can actually see the story being told through the different sections of the band. And that is something that I think we need to see more in the designers, costumes, and the presentations that mass band actually bring. So this is something that was very synonymous with Mr. Bain's production. Now, Mr. Bain, again, we know that he did not only take his mass to St. George to participate in Spice Mass events, but then he took his entire band to Carriacou. He took his entire band to Carriacou for Kayak Mass to contribute to the development of that product there as well. And many of the people who played mass in Carriacou will remember Mr. Bain coming up there with his boat of masqueraders to play mass with the people in Carriacou for Kayak Mass. And that is, again, that is something, a great contribution that he made to the cultural art form, to the mass art form in Grenada and Carriacou. Now, Mr. Bain was very generous with his time as well and his expertise. He had plans also to pass on his skills and talent, because we spoke shortly before his illness, and he had plans. Well, we were talking about how we can actually pass on the skills, and he was very enthusiastic. He was ready, willing to pass on his talent and his skills, because he's saying, Mr. Jacob, I'm getting old, and we cannot let the culture die. We have to pass it on to people. So he was always looking at how we can pass on his skills. Mr. Bain, again, he was the kind of mass band leader who would just call Spice Mass office just to check up on the staff, how you all are doing, and then he would come with an idea that would not more so to benefit him, but to benefit the entire product. So how can we improve the Spice Mass product? So these are some of the things we remember Mr. Bain for.
Yes, and you make a good point about him just calling to check up on people. And now a lot of people don't know this, but Peter Bain and I, we had a very, very good relationship. We had a very special relationship, and he would always inquire about me through his daughter Janelle, and I would always say, look, tell my buddy I said hi, and that relationship developed out of. Again, his passion for what you said, Mr. Jacob, about traditional mass. When I worked in the media in Grenada, Peter and I would cover carnival events in Grenville. And Peter really appreciated the time that I took to learn about the Mass, to learn about the traditional aspect of the Mass. And we developed that bond back then. And I got a sense that, he was really passionate about that. But I'm going to bring you in again, Mr. Douglas, talking about that that need for continuity. That's something that Peter was passionate about. Now, when we're thinking about what he was able to do in Grenville and continuity and legacy building here, one of the shows that he started launch was, I believe, is it the Miss Bold and Beautiful or no, I'm sorry,
The Mother's Day is
the Mother's Day.
Yeah, Mother's Day is Queen show.
Yes, the Mother's Day Queen show.
Yeah.
Now, that's one of the things I thought that was a very novel idea to celebrate mothers. So I want you to speak to that piece, please.
And I want to just endorse exactly what Mr. Jacob said about continuity, because this is important. And when we talk about sustainability, it must be all-encompassing, Dr. Bubb. Not just about food sustainability, but also cultural sustainability as well. We must have sufficient culture, for now and for future generation. And in order for that to happen, there must be some continuous baton passing, from the present generation to future generation that is coming up, so that people, because sometimes a lot of things get lost because of the fact that there was not, that smooth transition, from one generation to the next. Hence the reason why, some of the traditional masquerades, like the Wild Indian and the Apache and, the Maypole and all the, have lost, you understand? And I'm using the word lost. I know it's a strong word, but I want to use the word lost. Their place, in the whole carnival and cultural space, in this country here. So there needs to be, and I want to challenge Spice Mass on this one. There needs to be a program of continuity. So, for example, who can we identify, right, in Peter's band, Spice Mass promoters? Who else can we identify, as talent there, who can take this thing forward? Because this person may need some training, because people's creative juices are different, so they may need some assistance in terms of helping them to be creative as Peter was. What can we teach them, in terms of helping them to take that which he has left behind and to develop on it, in order for there to be some kind of continuity. Because I know that they will need some help, because every time you lose an icon, it's very difficult, very, very difficult. I have seen it with Rainbow City All Stars, when Squares, we call him Squares.
Squares, yes.
Squares died. It was very difficult to get someone to replace him. I know it's kind of difficult, but yet still we need, that kind of collaboration. And I'm happy that also Mr. Jacob made the point that when Peter called, it was not selfishly about his mass and himself. He was thinking about Grenada and the whole culture of Grenada, the cultural products. And that is exactly how it should be, right? So I want to, as I'm emphasizing, they say emphasis is good, emphasizing the fact that there need to be this collaborated efforts, between the Spice Mass, because Spice Mass Corporation, we don't want to make it a beast of burden. There need to be collaborating with other entities without, for example, within, like the Spice, not the Spice Mass, but Peter's mass promoters. How can we work along with them to ensure that there is continuity?
Mr. Jacob, the ball is in your court here. How do you respond to that challenge?
Well,
and I think it's a legitimate challenge, and it is a legitimate concern. One of the challenges and one of the difficulties that we see in Grenada is that there is a gap with respect to that intergenerational transfer of cultural wealth.
Yes.
Right? That oral tradition is dying. And with it, and when someone dies, a library goes with them. Yes. So how then do you really step up to the plate to ensure that we have that kind of continuity that Mr. Douglas speaks about? Mr. Jacob, over to you.
Yes. So one of the first things I would like to challenge our cultural enthusiasts out there is to start looking at these master cultural icons and maybe start doing some further research and documentation on these persons. So, for example, Peter Bain, he has passed on. Someone now could take up the challenge to do some research on Mr. Bain, the work of Mr. Bain, and have that documented there, so that the children coming up, okay, they can look and read up about Mr. Bain, about the history, the contributions he made to Carnival, and all the other areas that he made contributions to. But further to that, Spice Mass Corporation, we are already in talks among ourselves and with our stakeholders about passing on the knowledge where we can have master people creating or facilitating events or workshops that would help in passing on this knowledge. Again, that's not the direct mandate of the Spice Mass Corporation. That's something that has to be worked along with the Grenada Cultural Foundation and the Ministry of Culture. So we are ready to partner with them and also to partner with other stakeholders in the community to work along documenting and creating the avenue for younger people to come on board and understand the concepts in terms of creating mass, etc., that would sustain the Grenada Carnival product going forward.
I just want to press you there on because we hear about these policy prescriptions and these plans, and you said that is obviously not under the remit of the Spice Mass Corporation. That is a function of the Grenada Cultural Foundation. One of the concerns that I always have is that I would say within the last decade or two in Grenada, there's just a blatant and wanton disregard for history. And we see that personified by the fact that, not you, of course, that we have a public library and a national archives that is just laying waste. Okay. And so how then do we ensure that that is systematically codified, for example, into the school system, where cultural studies can actually become a course and not just teaching history to get to get a pass? Of course, that's of course, I'm sure Mr. Douglas can jump in here, but Mr. Jacob, yes, workshops are all well and good, but I think it should be systematic. I mean, for years we were teaching our citizens that Christopher Columbus discovered Grenada and he was a knight in shining armor, when we know he was a mass murdering thug. Okay, so how then do we get to a place where we are systematically codifying these cultural icons, these cultural forebearers into the education system, and not just doing workshops around carnival time?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because, and I'm glad also Mr. Jacob referenced the Cultural Foundation, because the Cultural Foundation has a tremendous role to play, all right? And there must be some collaborative effort because of the pushback of colonialism. Because even if we leave here, because I had planned to say it here in the program, that we need to rename something. We need to name something in honor of Peter Bain, right? His contribution not only in culture, but also sports. So I was thinking, for example, maybe the Victoria Ground or the Ford playing field, in his honor. But we have this pushback, especially when the place carries a colonial name like Victoria, Princess Alice Hospital, Princess Royal. It seems as though these names are guarded, and we find it very difficult to remove them and replace them with local individuals who have contributed much more, and I'm repeating, much, much more to the development of Grenada than these people, because these people were just the wife of this one, or the wife of that one, or the husband of this one, or were just governor of the place, or something of this sort. So I'm saying this, and sorry for being a little too passionate, but that's me. We need to go back to the drawing board. We need to look at our curriculum, right? Because we talk a lot of things in Grenada, and every time somebody mentioned the National Library, I feel very, very sad, very, very sad. I remember I was doing research for a particular book, and I spent days and weeks in the National Archive, just, researching information and what have you. I got so excited in there. And now look at the state of it, and it is not on the front burner. It's not a major concern. So going back, yes, our whole social history is not really a front burner issue, right? For Ministry of Education, Ministry of Culture, sorry to say that, the Cultural Foundation. We talk around things. We do a little things to commemorate certain things. But in the driving force, in terms of setting that foundation so that future generation could develop a greater appreciation going forward for what we have and what we consider to be our culture. For example, Dr. Bubb, don't you know that officially oil dung is not our national dish?
I never
because
knew
it
that.
has not been gazetted.
I never knew that. It was never gazetted.
Never gazetted.
So that would make sense why other islands are
You
trying
understand
to
the
go
point
on
I'm
the oil
making?
train.
We are just
Right,
fighting
yeah.
up with a national dress. You understand me? But what has to precede those things is what I refer to as a national consciousness. And that is what will drive these things. Because once this national consciousness is not there, and we are still, you understand me, being influenced by these foreign cultural elements and what have you, we would not see the need.
Well, colonial cultural elements.
Colonial
as
culture,
well.
yes, colonial culture. We
For
would not see the
example,
need to do that.
Princess Alice. I mean, what has she contributed materially to
That's
the
the point
Princess
I'm
Alice
making.
Hospital?
That's the point
I
I'm
don't know
making.
that she contributed.
I have proposed, you understand me, to rename it in honor of Dr. Lawrence Gibbs, you understand me? And nobody flew with that. The idea just actually just staying away, and so forth. And if you make another suggestion to rename something, I remember when they renamed Albert Street in honor of Ben Jones, there was a lot of reaction and public reaction. So we have to ensure that we remove that kind of colonial, pushback, I call it, because it's really a pushback. And if we don't remove that, it will be difficult for us to really, you understand me, reignite, and set on fire our cultural renewal. I call it a cultural renewal because we need to renew and so forth. Once this exists, then it will be problems.
Yeah, Mr. Jacob, same question. I know that we got sidetracked there a little bit, but I want to give you a chance to respond in terms of that institutional impairment. Kelvin?
I think I got sidetracked myself.
Yeah.
On the
No,
question. What were you trying to say?
No. The question is, how do we codify these ideas that you reference?
Yeah, and I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. I think it has to go back to the schools. All right. If we really want anything to fly, we have to take it to school children. I always say that as a former teacher myself. So I think bringing carnival arts on the curriculum is very important, and it's not hard to do because that was part of my studies. It doesn't have to be a new subject called carnival arts on the curriculum. All we have to do is to look at the different elements and incorporate it in the various subjects already. So, for example, the maths, the business subjects, the science subjects, all of these you can see carnival in all aspects of the subject, even the language, etc. So it doesn't have to be really putting a new subject on the timetable to burden the timetable, but we can look at spreading it across the subjects already listed on the timetable or on the curriculum.
And we have to quickly get to the next segment, but let us put a bow on this conversation here. Of course, again, I wish to extend my condolences to the Bain family, to the Grenville community where Mr. Bain was deeply embedded. The last time I saw Brother Bain a few years ago was actually in town on Carnival Tuesday with his band, and we had a good long chat in front of the truck, even though the music was blaring. But he was very happy to see me, and I was very happy to see him. So, Mr. Jacob, I would start with you for some closing comments.
Yes, so again, we just like to remember Mr. Bain as someone who was very dedicated to the culture, dedicated to Carnival, dedicated to the Spice Mass product. Remember him as one who was also very a stickler for time. Mr. Bain left Grenville, he came to Parade in St. George, gave his showcase on the Parade route, and then he went back to Grenville to make the people in Grenville happy where he started his mass. Mr. Bain was also very prompt in terms of reporting because we have to report on the subventions given to the various bands, and Mr. Bain was a mass band leader who always submits his records on time so we can proceed to give our reports, etc. So these are some of the things that we are going to remember Mr. Bain for. And Mr. Douglas spoke about it already. The the passion that he had for the culture, it was not profit driven. And we saw that in the way that he subsidized his band. His band was heavily subsidized. And mind you, he was not heavily sponsored. So during the year, Mr. Bain raised a lot of funds by himself in his community to help the people in his community to make sure that they can come and play mass. And speaking to Mr. Bain at the end of a carnival event, he said, Mr. Jacob, I didn't make anything, half of the costumes in the band, I give it away, because how could you see a parent coming and they want to play carnival and they have 5 children? I can't send them back. The whole family must come to the band. Okay, so these are some of the things that we will remember him for. He was someone who actually put his money where his heart was, okay, in the culture. And we want to extend condolences to his family on behalf of Spice Mass Corporation, extend condolences to his family. And we are hoping that someone in his family or someone among their masqueraders will really keep that band alive for the next Spice Mass and to actually for the community of St. Andrew.
And in honor of his legacy as well. And I think he would want that too.
Definitely, most definitely, yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Well, again, just want to echo the sentiments of Mr. Jacob, but I just want to slant it a little bit in sports, because Brother Peter Bain would have contributed significantly to sports. Even at the time of his passing, he was a member of the GFA competition committee. He was also a very prolific athlete in SAS. He was a junior champ for 1978 in his school inter-house sports, winning the 100, 200, 400, and I want to emphasize that. So don't look at his recent size. Also high jump, he was a very good high jumper. The football, again, he played football, he played cricket, and so forth. So in that aspect, because I know we have spoken quite a lot about the cultural contributions that he made. But that legacy, that sporting legacy, also I would like to see it continues. Someone will continue to organize the 5-a-side football, the 2020, the Mother's Day, I call it sell-out show in Grenville, that someone will continue to organize it because it's a much look forward to event from people in the parish. So again, I just want to, on behalf, of my family, extend condolences to his wife, Nola, who is my cousin, and also his children, and the rest of the extended family, and also the family of St. Andrew in particular. Peter, you will be greatly missed, and I know that your legacy will continue in various aspects of the field in which you would have contributed.
Mr. Douglas and Mr. Jacob are 2 men from the East. They say wise men come from the East. And there's another wise man here waiting in the wind, who is also from the St. Andrews Parish, Mr. Aline, who is actually from St. Andrews. So if you want to just say a quick word, brother, we'll get to your next segment, but just say a quick to the Grenadian public.
If I should start by extending my condolences as well to the family of Peter Bain, as a past student of SAS, which is my old school as well. I think his legacy is a fundamental one to the parish of St. Andrews in particular. The cultural pool that he brought to the parish was absolutely remarkable, and I think he would be greatly missed. From a personal level, I do not know Peter directly, but I'm aware of his, and I've met a number of his family members, his daughters, etc. So yes, he'll be very much missed by the community of St. Andrews.
All right, Brother Aline, we'll be getting back to you shortly. Thank you for that. And folks, stand by. We will be getting to the second segment, a very important conversation about the supply chain and shipping lane crisis that is enveloping the international community at this time, and what those impacts would be for a Caribbean civilization, a Caribbean space that is experiencing some very difficult challenges right now economically. So stand by, folks. We will be right back.
I would like to talk about the flow of marine transportation. Especially in this topic, I'll focus on FCL cargo. How is a cargo actually transported in marine transportation? It's important for beginners and apprentices of logistics to understand the flow of cargo and its paperwork. First of all, let's understand the overall logistics flow, then you will know what to do in each section in the flow. First, let's see the production work in a factory. It is quite rare for an individual person to use containers for transportation. But some factories produce goods every day and ship them overseas every week. Our customers also transport various cargoes by marine transportation, including automotive parts, frozen foods, paper, leather products, cosmetics, scraps, packaging materials, and so on. Once the QC of a completed product is done, a factory's shipping representative send a booking to a forwarder. At this time, the followings are informed: type and number of containers, pickup date, loading place, unloading place, cutoff, ETD, ETA, and free time. Based on the information, the forwarder prepares vessels, trucks, custom clearance, and confirms necessary documents. Basically, many customers request a one-stop logistics service, which has advantages of having a single contact to complete logistics to a forwarder. And checking the necessary documents is especially important. If any of information is wrong, a cargo cannot pass through custom clearance properly nor board a vessel. In addition, if a certificate of origin has a mistake, a cargo is not allowed for duty reduction. We need special attention for paperwork mistakes. To pick up a cargo, we visit a container depot to pick up an empty container, in the morning of the cargo pickup or in the evening of the day before.
Okay, welcome back, folks, and we will quickly move along and get to our second segment. And of course, this panel segment for the week will attempt to make sense of the current global shipping crisis that some experts say has been exacerbated by economic conditions created by the pandemic. So, how is the supply chain crunch affecting Caribbean economies? For starters, the average global cost of shipping a 40-foot container has moved from around 2,200 US dollars to around 7,900 US dollars. These increases, particularly in imports from China and the United States, will inadvertently be passed on to the consumer, whose disposable income has already been stretched thin during this pandemic period. The Caribbean region has witnessed a significant jump in food prices due to inflation, and the consumer price index for Grenada has experienced an exponential rise in the last 2 fiscal years. And then there is the threat of a reliable supply of basic consumer goods, which may force some retailers to play it safe, betting on their sellers while retiring less popular items, all while trying to break even due to waning consumer demand. The reality is, the experts, such as those that have assembled on this panel today, are not expecting a quick fix to this crisis anytime soon, as we will have to find ways of mitigating the fallout from what is happening at vital shipping ports of entry across the world. And so, on this time, I want to take this opportunity to welcome back Mr. Aline. Mr. Aline, did my monologue there make any sense to you as someone who works in the business of shipping?
Most certainly, and I credit as well to your introduction on the logistic process of how goods get and services get moved across the world. In your opening credit, you talk about a number of important aspects, and fundamentally, you talk about the economic recovery, and that is having an impact on the global economy. People getting to have some more food, but also part of that is about globalization. We are fundamentally within a stronger globalizing economy. And also we are in what we call a just-in-time system, whereby we do not keep the large stockpile of inventories as we would do, say, 20, 30 years ago. We keep just enough inventories in our warehouse to ensure that when we need them, we actually have them there for production. So on top of those two things, I would like to add a number of other aspects that fundamentally influence the crisis that we actually see now. So for the last 18 months, we literally sat at home because of COVID, and we haven't done anything. We haven't been able to go to work. We haven't gone to the shop. We work from home, and that in many ways fuel our appetite for e-commerce. So e-commerce over the last 13 to 18 months has grown by 77%. That's one factor. Another factor is also that a number of cargo that was moved by ocean was also moved on a passenger network. The COVID crisis ensured that the world global connectivity through air transport was fundamentally shut down. So all the freight that was carried under the wing of the plane or in the belly of an aircraft was automatically reduced. So we had about 97% reduction in air cargo capacity from the start of the pandemic to say about July of 2020. So that fundamentally reduced our ability to move stuff globally. And then, as you mentioned, the Suez Canal conundrum, that has two implications. One, it means that shipping days has been extended. We have the ship that should be, say, in Luxembourg was in the wrong place in the world, and that exacerbated the problem. But then also we have containers which are actually put on these ocean vessels being in the wrong place as well. So all those factors, we have COVID, reduced air cargo capacity, or just-in-time system, the Suez Canal, and yourself, myself buying more online really work to really exacerbate the problem. Do I see that as slowing down now? No, not in the slightest. As you rightfully mentioned, a container that was moved from China in 2019 for $200,000 US dollars is now $740,000 US dollars. 4 years ago, my company was selling charters. Sorry, 1 year ago, my company was selling charters under $1 million US dollars per plane. Now we're looking in excess of just bordering $3 million US dollars per plane, and that's the sort of going rates that is happening in the market. Naturally, that would influence the price you pay in the shop, because the Apples of this world would not internalize the costs. The manufacturers of the Nike products would not take the costs internally, and these costs needs to be externalized to the customer. So they would fundamentally be passed on to the customer as you go shopping. So you could expect things like your consumer electronics that would come from places like Vietnam or Cambodia or even Singapore to be inflated in price roughly about 35%. Then you also see, your food stuff, as the market reopen as well, people are starting to go to restaurants more. That is causing inflationary pressures as well on food. So the avocados that we buy from places like South Africa, if you live in the US or if you live in Europe, these prices of those products has actually increased fundamentally. You're looking at about 38% year-on-year increase in those prices. All those factors working together ensure that we are going to see higher prices. On to the second question about how the Caribbean and Grenada in particular respond to that. And
that's why we have our economist here. Dr. Charles, you are our returning champion here on the Bubb Report, one of our experts who we call on when we have to address these economic matters. But the ball is in your court, Mr. Aline, in attempting to make sense of how this will impact the region and how it starts to impact the region. Already he gave a big sigh. Now let's hear from you as an economist. Are we going to allow the markets to determine what this would look like, or would there be an increasing need for a heavy touch government regulation to perhaps mitigate some of these economic pressures that the Caribbean will confront and is confronting? Dr. Charles?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bubb, for this warm introduction. Thank you for inviting me again for another session of your program. I would like to start by saying that I agree with all the points made by Mr. Allen. He's totally on point. I totally agree with the whole description and whole analysis and breakdown of the problem. We are experiencing an increase in shipping costs, freight rates, and so forth. I looked at the index called the lactic dry index. I tend to have a tendency to look at these indices and look at individual prices. So I actually saw that there was a 300% increase in shipping costs, ocean freight rates from, let's say, December last year, 2020, on to September this year. So I mean, 300% increase in costs is a lot. So from a consumer point of view, we know businesses, producers, no one wants to actually absorb these increasing costs. So more likely than not, they will actually pass on these increasing costs to the consumer. So there will be an increase in cost in consumer goods. And a lot of the times we actually, in the Caribbean, we import raw materials to produce different goods, to produce a different goods. So there'll be an increase in raw material costs. There'll be an increase in, let's say, the cost of producing finished products. So there'll be an increase in the cost of goods overall. So more or less, we're going to see inflationary pressures in the Caribbean region. Now, I want to also touch, before I actually go in detail on the impact and potential solutions, I want to touch on another thing that is contributing to the inflationary pressures from the shipping side. So we also see the COVID pandemic causing a lot of supply chain disruptions. That is correct. We also see that there was the COVID pandemic has caused a lot of ports to operate below their full capacity. Apart from that, we also see because of when the pandemic occurs, that when the workers test positive for COVID-19, we also see a disruption in the port activities. Take, for instance, I want to highlight that there was something observed in August 2021 this year. There was a port in China that was the Ningbo port, which is the second largest port, the second busiest port in China. One of the workers at the port contracted COVID. They tested positive for COVID, and the result of that event alone caused the whole port operation to shut down, not just for that day, but for several days. So this was to facilitate contact tracing, quarantine, testing, and all the whole protocols associated with COVID-19. Of course, when these things occur, it causes delays. And of course, what Mr. Ali was explaining, when you have these delays occurring, you have increase in shipping costs. So, I mean, these events are not just one-off events. Yes, there was the Suez Canal issue that occurred in March this year. So all these things are causing inflationary pressures from the port side and the shipping aspect. So what does this mean for the average person? For the average person in the Caribbean, this means increasing in cost. This means a decline in purchasing power. So let's give an example. So we go to the grocery. A lot of people are working and they have income, and it's fixed income. So in Trinidad and Tobago, my country, people who are employed in public service still operating on 2012 salary and 2013 salary. But we're in 2021. So more than 7 years have passed, and we're seeing that all these inflationary pressures taking place, but your salary is not increasing. What that means for the average person that you have a decline in purchasing power. So if your salary was about, let's say, about $10,000 a month, which could roughly be about 5,000 EC dollars, that means that you have less money to spend. So in real terms, what you can buy with the same amount of money, let's say about 5 years ago, you might be able to buy about half of that. So that means you instantly becoming poorer. So this is a problem because, and I want to highlight too, in the food inflation part, because a lot of the food prices are increasing. When persons have a certain disposable income with a certain age income bracket, right? They spend a large proportion of their money goes towards spending on food, basic needs, basic things that you have to buy. So when you experience increase in the prices of these things, now you have no problem. So you could you're able to buy less food, and these things than before. This will have, let's say, long-term policy implications from like a health perspective point of view. Because if you're not buying healthy foods, then what you're buying, you might be buying good foods. So this might have long-term health consequences. So this is a serious problem that needs to be addressed from a government policy side point of view.
I want to stick a pin there because you said that this has to be addressed from a government policy side. I mean,
yes.
How do Caribbean governments operate in an environment to set that kind of policy when, again, the free market is supposed to make those decisions? Are we going to be adopting sort of a Keynesian economic approach, or a planned economic approach? What are your thoughts on that? Because again, Caribbean governments operate within that capitalistic framework.
Yes, that is true. Yes. So you're correct, right? So we operated within basically we operated with Caribbean in a basically free market liberalized approach. Now, with regards to shipping, right? No government in the Caribbean actually controls shipping costs because you have different shipping companies, and if the different shipping companies charge their freight rates based on demand and supply conditions. And right now there's inflationary pressure for the prices to go up. No problem. Now, from a policy perspective, the government will not. I don't recommend any government actually step in the market and actually subsidize shipping costs and anything like that. I mean, that is craziness. What I expect is the government to tackle the problem from the inflationary side. So, what increasing shipping rates the effect we're going to have is increasing prices, and then of course increasing inflation. So what the government can do is tackle the problem from the inflationary side. So we see in Trinidad and Tobago, the government passed the budget that was last week, and we saw the government actually recognize this problem, and one of the measures that's actually introduced by the Minister of Finance in Trinidad and Tobago's budget was the suspension of VAT on key food items. I totally support this measure. Why? Because if you remove the VAT, so if zero rate a lot of food products, so essentially you remove the VAT on these items, the cost from a consumer point of view will be decreased. So let's say an item would, of course, I just use in fact, before winning actual numbers, if you just remove the 12.5% VAT, then every food item that has become zero rated should cost 12.5% cheaper. So I mean, yes, we have an increase in shipping rates by 300%. 12% is really a lot less than 300%, but that is at least one policy measure to mitigate or alleviate the impact on consumers. Our next point I want to emphasize, and I made this point in last session that I had with you all some weeks ago, was the suspension on CARICOM's common external tariff on a lot of different items. And I say items rather than just food items because CARICOM, as a part of our customs union, all the Caribbean islands, well, a part of CARICOM, impose a common external tariff, which is the same tariff on the import of a lot of different products. If you remove the common external tariff, what this does is that countries now allow us to import these items at well, for a consumer point of view, the government will waive the tariff, yes, but for a consumer point of view, you'll now be able to get the item or access the item cheaper. So, I mean, it's a trade-off at the point. So, you have one win here where saying the consumer can get reduced prices if you remove the common external tariff on these products. But at the same point in time, there'll be a loser from the government side in the sense that the government will be giving up some revenue. So, this has some trade-off. You're winning on the consumer side, but you're losing on government side. And I want to highlight this point too, that this also has a challenge in the sense that governments are responsible for running countries. And if the government lose some revenue, some tariff revenues, of course, you're going to increase our financial burden. Because if you give some tariff revenue, then the government has to find some way to compensate for that revenue. Because if the government don't compensate for the revenue somehow, I mean, it will have to decrease expenditure. So I just want to highlight that there is a risk, there is a challenge with this policy measure. Well, the last practical policy measure that I recommend for all Caribbean governments, regardless if it's Grenada, Trinidad, Barbados, what I recommend is increased production, increased local production. We need to start to look at, let's say, import substitution from an effective and practical point of view. Mm-hmm. So let me give you an example. Trinidad and Tobago spend I think it's over $20 billion in the import of food. Why are we spending so much money in the import of food? And there's so much land idling all over the place. So this is a need for effective agriculture policy. I say effective because you can write a policy document and then nothing actually takes place. So effective. Right. Put plan into action, make this thing occur, make this thing take place. And we need to start to produce a lot of food products and not just primary agriculture production, but so let's say agro-processing also. So we convert the primary products into finished products that could be packaged and stored on a shelf and has a longer shelf life than, let's say, the primary products. So I strongly endorse import substitution and the local production of different consumer goods for use. And I think that from a Caribbean point of view, this could be a key policy measure to actually mitigate the inflationary pressures that we are facing right about now.
And
So,
yes, and you make that point. Grenada's late prime minister, who was also an economist, George Brizan,
mhm,
always spoke about value added, and he always spoke about the value of producing local, so
mhm.
as to be able to mitigate, the challenges that come with periods like these. But I want to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Emmanuel Duncan.
Mhm.
He is here. He's representing the Grenada Chamber of Industry and Commerce, which is the umbrella private sector business organization in Grenada. Mr. Duncan, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you, Doctor, and to your panelists and to your audience. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, Mr. Duncan. You've been hearing this conversation. You've gotten in on Mr. Charles, but representing the business community now, the chamber not only represents large scale businesses, but you represent medium sized businesses and small businesses in the country. First question is how is this shipping crisis affecting the business community in Grenada?
Well, like it's a good starting point. Like I think I came in at the point where the last guest was speaking, and I think he made
Yeah.
some fantastic points. But I just to put it into context. It's exactly the same, right? As these shipping rates, he's mentioned the 300%. I mean, like from China the east to the South America, we've seen 5 times increase. To North America, the more heavily trafficked route, we've seen things like double times. And these shipping rates, as you know, they go into the calculation of the import charges and duties. We're a country that are our revenue is largely based on our border taxes, and so. These border taxes they filter down into consumer prices. So businesses have it's a complex equation, and there's no simple fix. But think about the things that are affecting you. As a producer, maybe you're a small manufacturer, and you're an importer, you're a retailer, whatever you're doing, you're importing goods. That's what we do in Grenada. You're going to be faced with this massive increase. This is incredible. A 300% hit on freight. Now you're going to have to pay that freight. There's no way around it. And when it flips into the cost of your border taxes and into your pricing, it creates two major issues. One, obviously, is your cash flow issue, and two, you know it, the pandemic has obviously caused some reduction in spending power, and so you have this issue of should I what should I do on the procurement side? Should I increase my procurement? Should I decrease my procurement volumes, because I want to balance my inventory turns? So it's a very complex situation for all businesses, importers, manufacturers. As a manufacturer, you're relying on imports to be able to get the raw materials, and there's critical shortages of components, and it's surging prices all around. I mean, we're getting things like 10 and 15% increase in pricing of goods. That's separate and apart from the rates, from the
Yeah.
freight rates we're talking about. And so these have to be factored into the cost of the product, whether it's small scale manufacturing or just simply import for retail. So it's a very complex situation, and businesses are faced. Generally, the number one issue is going to be your pressure on cash flow, and the number two is the management of your inventory and your procurement volumes. That's really the two things that are going to coming up. Of course, there are a ton of other things, but I guess you'll get into that, labor and things like that we're facing at the moment.
Absolutely, and of course, the backdrop here is the pandemic. But one of the things I think here, speaking as a consumer, we know that these increasing costs are passed on to the consumer. You hear Grenadians talking about these particular inflationary pressures that are currently being experienced in Grenada. What can be done to cushion these impacts, while you also, of course, as businesses, you have to break even, you have to function, right? You have employees to pay, you have you have bills, you have other utilities that you need to pay. Okay, Grenlec will cut you off if you don't pay your bills. Yes. So how are you really juggling and managing that kind of pressure?
Well, from the chamber side, well, let's go back to business at the moment. You made a great point. Like the expense line isn't going to change. The
Yeah.
expense line is going in one direction. That's up. With COVID-19, we've had to make adjustments, arrangements. We've had to put things into place, and those are driving the expense line. And we know those are not one-offs. They're going to continue, whether it be sanitizer, managing staff, rejigging your offices, buying separate computers, people working from home, whatever it's going to be. Your expense line has made a bit of a shift. What can we do? Well, I'll tell you what the Chamber of Commerce has done here. and this is for all businesses. So I'm not sure how where you are, but like I mentioned before, everything being imported into Grenada, uh, we come up with a worldwide calculation called the CIF, which is the cost of the item, the value of the item, the insurance, and the freight, and that sum is then used as the basis for the calculation of the duties. And your guest a moment ago, he talked about the common external tariff, customs service charge, and VAT. So the import charges and taxes are applied to this CIF. And now, like I said, this CIF is component of the cost of the item, the insurance, and the freight. So what we've done at the chamber is we've taken a look at this 300% increase and say, listen, if we could ask the government to remove the freight from this calculation, then it will filter directly through the savings will filter directly through to the charges because we still need we can't ask government to remove the CET and the VAT and things like that. I mean, uh, our tourism product, as you know, is 50% of our GDP, and that's been pretty much wiped out. And so, we still need to collect money. We still need money to run the country. So we're saying, hey, this if we could get a reduction in the freight from what we're actually paying. So we've made a proposal to the government and said, can we use the pre-COVID freight rates? Let's take an example: a 40-foot container from China to Grenada, maybe about $5,500 pre-COVID. We're talking about $18,000 today. So we're saying, can we use that $5,500 in the calculation of your CIF value? So then the application of the import taxes and duties and the VAT are reduced. The impact coming through are reduced. They're reduced to the consumer. Now the importer is still going to have to pay the freight to the freight company, but the impact on the import charges, which are compounded all the way through to VAT, will not be there. And so we can then have a little bit more flexibility in keeping prices as tight as we possibly can to the consumer. So that's one. The second thing, I think your guest previously made some comments about CET and so on, and those are good comments. But in the context, in our Grenadian context and framework, keep in mind that we do need to collect border taxes for the stimulus package that was just announced. We're going to need to pay for that at some point. There were some grants in there, but we do need to pay for it. So we do need to collect. Importers, have a juggling I think task here, like we have to one of the things we can do is selection of goods. So on the procurement side, we can think about how can we have higher value goods, which will then offset the percentage of that freight cost which is added to the goods. So of course that places demands on cash flow, not only in the purchasing side but also at the import stage, like we just talked about with taxes and so on. They're a function of value. And then you have to think about the spending power in the economy, right? And your inventory turn times, like we mentioned before. And so, while you may have the liquidity if you do have the liquidity, sorry, to be able to adjust your balance of goods in your procurement basket to purchase higher value goods, then you could mitigate some of the freight costs as a percentage. But then you do really have to think about the demands on your cash flow and your inventory turn times. But really, I think the crux of what the chamber has put forward to the government is really something that can work for both sides. Because if you think about it, the government has not forecasted for this, so this isn't a revenue line that they're seeing.
Yeah, it's not. But my question to you: we have a budget that will be read in a few weeks. Have you made this proposal to the government of Grenada?
Absolutely. We have made the government. We've had multiple conversations all the way to the Minister of Finance. And I think in principle, they have agreed, but we haven't seen any implementation yet. We've talked about the months that we would be able to apply it. And we're hoping that, sometime in October, November, December, we can be applied as we see a bit of a turn up for the end of year season. But if you really take a moment for a doc, and you think about it, like I was saying, these are not included in what was budgeted for 2021 because like your guest said before, these freight rates as a result of COVID, and so they're inflationary, and by collecting duties and taxes on top of that freight, as we mentioned before, it is really tantamount to simply taking human suffering and turn it into cash. And that's not what we expect from a government. So I am of the firm belief that the chamber proposal will be accepted and will be implemented, in a short course, and consumers can benefit immediately.
And Mr. Lean, I want to bring you back here because in my reading and research with respect to shipping and logistics companies, you work with one of those companies that does a lot of heavy lifting with respect to international shipping. One of the things that I found out was that there's been also exponential increases in costs of containers, in costs of these implements, the things that you need to move goods and services, goods across the globe. How is your company mitigating those increases? Mr. Lane?
Oh, sorry. We do not really do ocean freight, more or less.
Okay.
So we fundamentally an air cargo carrier, but nonetheless, I could still answer your question. And I think we are seeing that from a number of ends. So, you know, speaking to some of the big companies like JAS or DHL, who moves a lot of stuff on the ocean, or DSV, or even CGMA, which is a big ocean freight company. We have a number of problems in the industry. So first of all, we talk about the sort of displacement that goes on since March with the Suez Canal issue, and means that the containers are actually in the wrong place in different parts of the world. But then also we look at the issue that we had in the UK a few weeks ago, whereby we didn't have hauliers to actually move containers across the port. So we are seeing those backlogs, in the various ports across the UK being for longer than 5 days. Presently in Los Angeles, outside of Los Angeles, we are seeing ocean freights having up to 14 days wait for just to get offloaded. So presently, if you look at the global map, there are something close to between 76 to 79 ocean liners just been docked outside in Los Angeles, waiting to be offloaded. Now that puts competitive pressure on the next set of containers that the shippers would need in order to fill them with freight, and that's where you sort of get the bubble from in terms of the global freight prices. From an air cargo logistics perspective, we actually seen some of those filtering over to air cargo. So freight that would normally be moved via ocean because of its bulkiness or because it could take 14 days to be moved across the world. Freight that we call very near to the end of that sort of cycle, ocean to air cargo transfer, we've seen a lot of that being transferred to air export now. And air export is fundamentally more expensive than that of ocean freight. Yeah. And again, given those inflationary pressures, we also seen the prices of air freight being doubled. I'm actually speaking to you from my office purely because we have major problems in places like Hong Kong. So, you know, your guest, Mr. Don Charles, mentioned the problems that we had with the Delta variant in places like China. We have seen a spike in Hong Kong over the weekend, and you know, part of my job is to manage expectations of our biggest customers. So I'm here at 7:15 in the night and making sure that when the rest of the world open up tomorrow morning, so when Europe opens and the Americas open, you know, our biggest customers know what's happening to part of the world. So we are seeing those sort of cycles sort of being repeated across the world. When you have COVID in places like China, you have to take 21 days mandatory isolation, and people who have been in contact with you also need to take a 7 days mandatory isolation. So you're looking at a significant reduction in manpower. Now, that also increases the cost of cargo, be it ocean cargo or be it air cargo, because now you're sweating the existing capabilities or the human resources. You're sweating them more, you have to pay them greater incentive. All those factors filter into the price that we actually pay at the shop. If you would just allow me as well, I just touched on, I mean, I'm not an economist in the slightest, despite getting a very good grounding from Babatunde Oshikan Louis back
our economics and our economics lecturer at TAMCC. We graduated.
Exactly, but Kelon, you've always been on the other side, haven't you? So yes. So if I would look at in terms of what the chamber is doing, I think it's a really good project in terms of ensuring that you remove the cost of shipping. And if you could bring that cost base back to pre-COVID 2019, 2018 level, gives you a really good baseline in how to evaluate the cost of your shipping. So the government should take it on, but that's a very short-term measure. I think COVID in many ways should open the Caribbean, not just Grenada, as the imperative of us needed a very sustainable and a secure food program. It would need to reignite that debate. When we were growing up, we heard about food sustainability and food security. Over the last 10 years, that has actually dissipated, and we need to re-engage a conversation on how do we protect Grenada, the Caribbean, ensuring that when we have those massive externalities or the massive surges across the world, to some level, we are insulated from those environmental shocks. I think that's where the debate should really center. What are we doing from ensuring that we have, a re-engagement in rural agriculture, be it in St. Andrews, be it in Birch Grove, be it in St. David's, but how do we re-engage our Grenadian population to not just see agriculture as a boring, dirty job? I fundamentally like agriculture. When I get back home on holidays, my first thing is to go to the garden and to clean a cocoa stool or to prune some banana leaves. I fundamentally grew up, in 10 acres of land in Conference, close to the poetry. So we need to find out, or we need to find a way, a mechanism, how we re-engage people or our population to be having that passion for ensuring that level of food security. And maybe it might help us in the very long run to ensure that we don't run into those problems again.
Mr. Charles, I want you to pick up and unpack the comments Mr. Aline just made here about and the proposal that you probably heard from Mr. Duncan as well. Mr. Charles, I'll give you the floor, because we need and I think that the point is we have to be able to mitigate. This is all about mitigation, because I don't think the fundamentals of this global trade crisis that we're currently confronting, we have no control over that. I mean, until these other factors, such as COVID-19, such as these pent-up consumer demand, gets to a normal. So, Mr. Charles, I'll go over to you, Dr. Charles. Sorry.
Yes. So I agree with you, Dr. Bubb. So the conditions we're experiencing right about now, it was like a surprise to me to see how these prices just rise so rapidly. There's just so high inflation. 300% increase in shipping costs. That's a lot. And it's not just shipping costs alone going up. We've seen a lot of price of primary commodities are going up. We are experiencing bullish prices on almost everything. We look at oil. Oil reached $80 last week. So we just in a period of inflationary pressure, and this not looking like it's going to end by the end of 2021. This is looking like it's going to spill over to 2022. And so all of the explanation that is being touted is the increase in demand and tight supply. But I have a more deeper understanding. I say that, not matter what I'm saying, but I've realized that this is speculative demand. A lot of financial assets are traded. We have futures, we have swaps and so forth. And there's a lot of speculative demand, speculative power to cause the increase in prices of these financial assets. So yes, we have shipping costs going up, but commodities as a whole are going up. So in terms of policy measures, I think that you can attack this from a supply side perspective. And one of the measures that I recommend is supply, increasing productive capacity. And I strongly want to recommend again the import substitution. So apart from the food, apart from the production of primary products and agro-processing, we could try to see how best we can look at, let's say, regional value chains, how we can collaborate within the Caribbean and collectively produce different goods and services. So we might have one country might be strong in producing one product, another country might have a deficiency in that product. Why do we not, as Caribbean neighbors, I mean, we form this whole CARICOM and CSME and so forth, put this thing to use. Why don't we collaborate and produce different goods and export and trade with each other? And collectively, we can try to work to help each other and address this problem. I think this is one of the strong policy recommendations to address this problem: regional value chains, regional collaborations between the CARICOM neighbors to try to produce different manufactured goods and address this supply side problem. So rather than having just local import substitution, we can look at, let's say, a regional import substitution and regional value chains. So that's one policy recommendation. The other recommendations, well, we saw a low-hanging fruit, what was implemented by the government. We saw the suspension of VAT. I strongly recommend this thing. I mean, 12% doesn't really compensate for 300%, but I mean, at least something to mitigate the impact on consumers. Now, everybody want more money, but I mean, even self, let's say, government say we will increase consumer wages to mitigate this impact. I think the prices could still go up. So let's say get more money. Let's say get a 20% increase in salary now, and prices still continue to go up. Any given gain from the government, you're going to lose back in prices. So this is a particular situation. Now, I was speaking to someone last week, and I was speaking about, let's say, price controls. And so you have inflation and you can have price controls. Now, this could work at, let's say, to the supermarket to some extent. But if you look at price controls, there'll be pressure for, like, let's say, the creation of a black market, because you can have more shortages and you have a black market developing, whereby if you want to actually get the goods that you want, you have to actually pay more money. So maybe in the 1990s that would have worked, but I don't think, let's say, a price control framework like within a Keynesian type setting would work right about now. So I think that the real solution is really a supply. Try to produce more and try to collaborate more with the Caribbean neighbors to produce more goods to help mitigate the impact of these inflationary prices. Because this doesn't look like a problem that's going to be solved this year. This looks like it's going into next year. I hope that it can be solved by next year, but let's see how things unfold.
Yeah, Mr. Duncan, we have a question here from one of our viewers. Let me put up the question on the screen here. It's saying customers are accusing local companies of price gouging, and I'm referencing Grenada now. No matter how they try to explain the sharp price increases, some companies have opted to charge a smaller markup to absorb the blow. The business community needs this to be explained on their behalf. You want to tackle that, please?
Well, look, let's. I don't know how much was discussed before I came into play, but let's just understand that part of this global problem we're having on supply chain at the moment is really we're having a sync problem, right? The Western world, largely, we're beginning to emerge from lockdowns. Where we want finished products, raw materials, components from our friends over in Asia, where they're still under a lot of COVID-related restrictions, and which really constricts the ability to meet demands. As of Thursday, I was reading that there are 497 container ships waiting to dock. It's outside ports in Asia, Europe, North America, and the delay of vessels that are arriving into the U.S. and Canadian ports from the Far East, from the time you arrive to the time you can dock and offload, it's gone from 14 hours in June of 2020 to almost 13 days in September. So there is a real problem associated with the pandemic. I mean, obviously, China is at the center, the world largest trading nation. It's at the heart of this global gridlock, right? When the ships get to China or to the Far East, they have to quarantine for a week or more before they're allowed to dock, and so there's disruption to customs, ports, and so on. And the longer they have to wait on the inbound side to take on goods, the longer it is for us to get goods. So there is a real shortage. So consumers. We've talked, so all of this has led to this increase in freight that we talked about that is being passed on. So it's real. Consumers have to appreciate that it is real. As importers, when we get hit with these kinds of, as you guys were saying a moment ago, when you get hit with it, you have to call up the freight company and ask, like, is this a real, like, what are you quoting me here? And I'm accustomed to 5, 6, maybe 7,000, but you're quoting me 3 times and 4 times. And so you have to rethink now, should I wait for should I even ship the goods that I have? What else can I consider? So consumers have to appreciate that it is real. There might be 1 or 2 elements of price gouging, nothing that we've seen majorly in Grenada. The things that have been given, especially the COVID-related items like the masks, sanitizer, things like that. The Chamber of Commerce worked with the government of Grenada to ensure that those are given concessionary treatment coming through customs, and customs are smart enough to require price controls, percentage price controls on those items. So on those you wouldn't see. Now there's some things that have to get added to that list, and we're working on those with the government. We're talking about things like the oximeters. We've seen some demand for some medicinal components now, things that have to, these things have to be, I think we have to make adjustments over time. So recognize that as we kind of come out of these lockdown periods globally, we will see things beginning to shift, to stabilize. But like you guys said, it's going to be 2022, and some of it is going to filter into 2023. But here are just some things that I just got from my colleague who's having trouble signing on.
Logging in,
Osman
yeah.
Henry. Yeah, he just sent me a note. He said, a couple of things he'd like to mention is one, we're talking about the delays of goods. We talked about that. The shortage of goods. We talked about that as well. But also, he's saying like some distributors from whom we place orders, they're no longer taking the tasks to organize inland freight to the freight forwarders. So typically, you would have your distributor organize freight, and that's become a major problem because now you're sitting in Grenada or in a country in the Caribbean, and you're trying to get somebody besides your distributor. You're trying to get another agent to organize inland freight, and that just increases your cost, pushes up your overhead, and just pushes costs into the goods again. So it is real. Price gouging, I don't see that as something that's happening in Grenada in a major way. Maybe one or two small, we may, but we haven't had any major reports of that kind of thing. So consumers really need to appreciate what importers, manufacturers are going through. It is a global problem kicked on by the pandemic and many other associated concerns.
Yes, gentlemen, we will come back for some closing comments as we wrap up the show. So I thank you all for staying with me, and stand by. We will be right back.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not fair? Don't know the terms.
We love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm going to live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency?
Since losing that seat, what have you been up to?
Now, Mr. Attorney General, this particular provision sounds unconstitutional, but why were there not consultations before moving forward with the proposals? Did they say what will happen when you guys get to St. Vincent? Because there are pressing social economic issues that I would want to address with you. In the hyper-information age of social media, the Bubb Report knows there is more to the story. We have questions and demand answers. We strive to hold the powerful accountable and tell an unbiased, contextual story. You know what happened. We let you know why it happened. There is always more to the story. The Bubb Report, streaming every Sunday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube. And welcome back, folks. We are about to close the program. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Aline. You are actually in the United Arab Emirates. Is that correct? You are in. Are you
close
in Doha?
So Doha, Qatar. Yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what time is it in Doha?
It's just past 7:30.
7:30 p.m.
7:30 p.m. So we have another few hours to go, as I mentioned to you. The problems we're having with the Delta variant in Hong Kong. Our customers, our biggest customers, would actually need to wake up tomorrow morning, be it in Europe or be it in the US, to actually have an idea of what's happening. A lot of the panel mentioned the optimism of seeing that sort of the world returning to a sort of better level of freight rate in 2022. Our own analysis here shows that we're not expecting that for 2020 until 2023, Q1 at the very earliest. And that's for a number of reasons. Yes, we've seen the world opening up in terms of allowing belly capacity to actually get back into the market. So the likes of British Airways, Virgin Atlantic, beginning to fly back into the Caribbean, beginning to fly a lot into holiday destinations, and that takes a lot of the capacity that we have in the market under the belly of the aircraft. But then we're also in a sort of conundrum whereby we see spikes in the Delta variants means economies, in particular in Asia, which is at the powerhouse of the world, they are having to seesaw their opening and their closing. I mean, we had a major problem a few weeks ago in places like Chengdu. We have PVG being closed a few weeks ago, and we are going to see those things happening more and more in the future. We cannot insulate ourselves from the global environment. Globalization is part of the real world in which we live in. But what would be really important is that Caribbean governments, and in particular my own country of Grenada, we need to be very creative. We need to be agile. We need to be adaptive. And most of all, we also need to be inclusive in how we tackle the measures going forward. So the initiative proposed by the Chamber of Industry and Commerce is a very good one. Again, it's a very short-term measure because we have to pay for stuff, and we are a net importer of goods and services. So fundamentally, we need money to pay for those goods that's coming in. But governments of the regions need to be very creative. They need to be closer to the ear of the people who are mostly affected. We can no longer allow them to be sat at the ministry's office and thinking of ways that they put together some data and some analysis, or some consultant say we should do that. We need to go back to really listening to the people who are there experiencing the difficulties and who have some really good solutions, so that they can share. So yes, we have a very good short-term measure, but going forward, a lot of your participants, your Facebook viewers mentioned that we need to have a sustainable food in particular program. We need to have a way that we insulate ourselves as the Caribbean and as Grenada from the exogenous shocks that we are seeing across the world. So in final words, government needs to be creative, we need to be adaptive, and we need to be responsive and inclusive in our decision making going forward.
Mm-hmm. And let me bring in Mr. Duncan. You need to unmute the microphone, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you very much. I apologize.
Yes,
I am traveling, and so I'm not in the most optimum of conditions.
Yes.
As we think from a chamber point of view, as we think about the businesses in Grenada and what they're doing, many businesses are actually taking a bit of a hit on margin, understanding the plight of the consumer. What you would notice generally, if you move around, is that, and you discuss with many business owners, it's simply, obviously there's a cost we pass along, but they're attempting to take a bit of a hit on margin to tighten the belt as much as possible, so that the impact doesn't flow through to the total impact doesn't flow through the consumers. And we have to commend businesses who are doing that, which is why I feel like there are very few situations where you will see price gouging. Now, there are increases, no doubt, but understand that the businesses are doing what they can to be able to reduce the impact to you. Couple of other things I think I'd just like to close with really quickly is that I think one of your guests mentioned it. The short-term measure by the chamber is one, but two, there is an absolute need. I mean, we are a net importer, like I said, and food imports, the value of the food imports to us, it shows the absolute need for us to have secondary processing and storage facilities, so what we can produce locally. We do very little bottling and canning and things like that in Grenada, and our neighbors in Trinidad do the same. And there's, your guest mentioned, the centers, how can we trade between ourselves? And so we do need to think from a policy perspective of how we can use these centers of excellence between us, develop a transport mechanism, and be able to feed ourselves as a region. And the third thing I'd like to mention is simply on the policy side as well. As these shortages continue to hit within the CARICOM region, things like cement and steel, these building materials, construction is driving our economy, keeping it afloat at the moment. As these centers of manufacturing for those construction products begin to fail in terms of the ability to supply, the governments are going to have to make decisions about the common external tariff. As we look to supply these materials from outside of CARICOM, these tariffs have to be removed. These protective tariffs for the CARICOM region have to be removed in order for us to get supply in to be able to continue construction.
And Dr. Charles, I would give you the final word for today's program.
Okay, thank you again thank you again for inviting me to your show and so forth. So we know that inflation is a global problem, and the problem is driven by several factors. So the first one, as we know, is the direct supply chain disruptions caused by COVID-19. We know that several businesses are not operating at their full capacity. We know that there's a global container shortage, and we know that we have occasional issues where key container ports are being shut down when workers test positive for COVID-19. So this is a problem. What this means for the average person is that if you have an increase in cost, you have an increase in shipping costs, there will be an increase in import costs. We import a lot of different goods in the Caribbean. So this will mean that we will be importing inflation. So this will result in a reduction in purchasing power. So you have an income, in real terms, you'll be able to buy less goods and services than before. So as a consumer, you need to find innovative ways to stretch your income. That might mean buying less goods and trying to produce more. So like, let's say you have some people have a home garden and they could produce whatever, like produce short crops, like let's say lettuce, and you have tomatoes, pimentos, and these things. I mean, this might not sound like much, but these things, you save about $5 here, $10 here, $20 here. These things add up over a period of time, and this could help you, this could easy burden on your pocket from a consumer point of view. So consumers have a role to play in reducing the inflationary impact upon themselves. The government have a role to play. We could see one thing government could do is remove VAT. The next thing that governments could do is we can address the common external tariff, and can move collectively, the common external tariff on some of food products. And the policy measure that I want to strongly recommend, as I mentioned previously, is the import substitution policy, whereby we look at, let's say, producing goods and services within the region, within the Caribbean region. So things that we import, try to produce them locally, both primary products, agro-processed products, as well as whatever manufacturing products that we can. And if it is, we can do this at a regional scale, this can mitigate the impact of the inflationary pressures caused by the increasing ocean freight rates. And this could help consumers, it could help society as a whole live a better and a more prosperous life, so to say that. So I would strongly recommend this policy.
Dr. Charles, the Caribbean policymakers, the private sector, shipping companies, they all have their work cut out for them during this period. It is a critical time, as if the COVID-19 pandemic was not enough for the region, as if the inflationary pressures that we're currently seeing was not enough. We were forecasting that this might just get worse. So how do we mitigate this? And I thought this was a very important conversation this morning. So I thank the panelists for appearing on the program. Mr. Lean, I know it's a work day for you as well. And Mr. Duncan, I know you're traveling, so thank you all. And I know, Dr. Charles, you continue to do your research. So thank you all and for appearing on the Bubb Report today. Folks, again, this program would be aired as a repeat broadcast on the Grenada Broadcasting Network in Grenada on Wednesday at 8 p.m. for those of you who did not have an opportunity to catch the program, or for those of you who don't necessarily use the social media platforms. So on behalf of my production team who helped me to put this program together every week, I thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Bubb Report. I thought today's episode was extremely informative and educational. Thank you to everyone. You have a wonderful week, and we will see you next week for another installment of the Bubb Report. Bye-bye.